All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you, as always, for locking in, whether you're watching, listening, following, subscribing. Appreciate y'all very much. This is our Friday episode. Probably can hear in the background, especially if you're watching on the video side. We are live here at Imperial Pizza, 1035 Abbott in South Buffalo. I'm joined not by one, by two guests. One of them kind of like an unpromoted surprise guest here to the middle. My man, Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic. And to my left, Kris Baker. All right, so this is going to be the Fairburn or the Baker Fairburn Moran hockey show. What's going on, guys? How you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good.
This is Matthew's episode. I just want to be clear. I just thought I'd come down and kind of crash it, maybe just supervise Matthew a little bit, make sure he doesn't overstep the boundaries and represents the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show brand properly tonight. But so thank you, Matthew, for letting me.
We're a package deal.
For squeezing
Package
in.
deal. Two for one, man, here at Imperial Pizza. All right, so by the way, shout out Imperial Pizza. There's some really good wings here before we got going. Cajun dry rub. Traditional, regular, medium wings, which is, I feel like a thing of the past here in Buffalo. What was the other one? Hot garlic parm.
That's so in full disclosure, I didn't come down to crash. I just wanted to mooch off the wings that were made available for, again, Matthew's episode.
Let's talk. We're going to talk Sabres, obviously. Talk some Buffalo Bills as well. Matthew used to cover the Bills. Kris, I know you're a football guy, golf guy, sports guy, generally speaking here. Let's talk about your show, though. Let's start there. Talk about what made you guys started. I've been telling you for Kris for quite a while that there's a little bit of a hole in this market. There's not a lot. It's not like Bills content where there's like 1,000,001 podcasts and shows and stuff like that. I feel like this market is hurting a little bit for some additional hockey coverage, and you and Matt provide that. Talk about the show, both you guys, you know, the premise of it, what made you want to start it, and where it's went in the short amount of time that you guys have been doing it.
Matthew's a credentialed writer from The Athletic. I'll let you take a run at this first.
It's the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show, so I feel like Baker.
All right. Well, then I'll get it out of the way, and then I'll shut up for a little bit. No, I think that it was an opportunity, I think, to just kind of do more as a content creator. I hate to say it because it's like so kind of cliche to say that, but you know, Twitter gets old. I stopped writing on my website personally. Now, I've known Matthew for a while, pretty much since he came to the Buffalo market, maybe shortly thereafter when The Athletic launched. Matthew and I hooked up, became instant friends. And I think that that's actually what matters. Like when you're really good friends with someone, not just like a casual work acquaintance, it's easier to work with that person. The show flows. So I had an interest in working with Matthew, especially like I got really excited when he took over the Sabres beat for The Athletic. Just another person to talk hockey with, but then to do it on a show and, you know, coming to a mutual agreement that like the show is going to be really about building a community and having the audience. It's really about them. I mean, Matthew and I can talk hockey anytime. Some of the phone conversations that we have when we're not recording are better than some of the podcast episodes that we have. But no, I think it was just an opportunity to do more and, you know, just to be out there more. For me, by the way, I'll shut up in a second. I think that it's an opportunity for me to talk about the Sabres, which I don't do very often. I'm too busy covering the prospects. So it's nice to just have that outlet and to host and to tee up Matthew and kind of let him do his thing. He's down there every day. And it adds a lot to the whole.
Yeah, Matt, talk about that. And also talk about, like I said, a big part of your interaction with the show from episodes that I've caught is the fans. There's a lot of interaction, a lot of comments on the shows from fans that gives you a chance to interact with them. So kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was part of what I missed a little bit. It was nice to be on the Sabres beat for about a year without podcast responsibilities to get my feet wet and just get comfortable with the NHL, the beat, you know, making sure that I, you know, kind of understood the landscape before I was ripping off takes, you know, every other week or whatever. But I think it's a great way to connect with different types of people. A lot of people know me from my football coverage, especially in this market. And so I don't think there's anybody in the market who knows hockey as well as Kris does. And like he said, we were friends before that. You know, Yeah, probably around when the Athletic launched, I think is when
was
I first
that?
met
When
Kris.
was that? Was it
2018.
2018? I remember that. You guys right off the bat, John, Tim. I remember that. Because everybody was leaving the Buffalo News or somewhere. You were at NewYorkUp.com at the time, right? And then you went there. You mentioned this, and you're right too. I feel like still, even now, and you've been coming to Sabres now for a while, the casual or the hardcore fan who only follows the Sabres maybe lightly, even though you've been on the Sabres beat for a while now, you cover the Sabres, they still identify you as a football guy. Probably first and foremost, how do you feel about that? And I know you're going to say hockey. I already know what the answer is, but covering a football beat and now covering a hockey beat, which do you prefer doing?
It's funny that you mentioned that because I do occasionally jump back in on football.
Yes, you do.
And it seems like every time I do, there's a lot of familiar people that engage with my content and like engage with my stories or my opinions or whatever. And so it's funny that those people are there and they're, probably ignoring most of the hockey stuff, but they're still.
They miss you covering football, sure.
Once in a while, I, throw an opinion out there. Not always a popular opinion, but people still are interacting with me in that way. There's pros and cons to both, and I like the fact that I can do a little bit of both, and that I'm able to jump in on football once in a while. I filled in for Joe while he was out on parental leave early this season. So it's nice to be able to do both. I like hockey generally better as a day-to-day. Like, I love going to the rink. I love being at the games. Kris and I were talking about this during the season that I know a lot of people are exhausted by how bad the Sabres have been.
Sure.
But I don't think Kris and I ever lost our energy for talking about them. And this time of year fascinates me to no end. What's Kevin Adams going to do with this roster? Who are they going to hire as a coach? The opportunities and the different, roster building puzzle. I love all of it. I grew up playing hockey, so it's always been near and dear to my heart, the path that guys take to the league, the various leagues. You got guys from all over the world. So I love all that. The one thing that I probably preferred about football is just the sleep schedule. It's I'm still getting used to it. This is my second season and working all those nights. I got a couple little ones at home. It's by the end of the season, I'm ready, to get back on that. I like to, wake up early if I have my way, but when you're getting home at midnight and, you've been working for 5 hours, it's hard to wind down and get good sleep.
I got to put this up on the video side. I forgot to do this right at the top. But Matt's been at it for a while now, man. Look
at that.
Where are you at? You're at New York Up at this time, right?
Yeah, that was New York Up didn't even exist. That was Syracuse.com.
Syracuse.com.
So they're the same company. So they hadn't started New York Upstate yet. That was fresh out of college. Not bad, huh?
I haven't seen your chin since COVID.
I did accidentally shave too close during COVID.
Here's a question for both of you guys. As a fan, obviously the team, perennially losing and not being in the playoffs weighs you as a fan. And a lot of fans are angry. Some fans, you just lose them completely. They don't care anymore. And it would be easy to say, well, you don't care about your job as much because the team stinks, but you're looking for stories. In your case, you're covering prospects. You're covering the next wave primarily anyway. And like I said, you're covering the team. You're covering stories. Win or lose, you're not getting tired of the gig. You know what I mean? I would probably be nicer, and the players would probably be in much better moods in the locker room if they're winning, of course, be more accessible, want to talk more, easily. But the job is the job, right? Like you haven't lost your passion for writing about hockey because you cover a team that stinks.
No, and it helped. I mean, I've only done it for 2 years too, right? Some of these guys that have been covering the team, Mike Harrington's been at it for 20 years or so. John Vogel was at it for 20 years before I took over. So maybe it would be different if that were the case, but times like this energize me, new coaching search. Like that's a fun story to cover. That's an interesting story to cover. What they can do this offseason, and what is a pivotal and defining offseason for this regime, I think is a fascinating story. So, no, I wouldn't say that. I think the difference between football and hockey, another difference is that with hockey, it's certainly, people are more engaged if they're winning. It's harder to follow an 82-game season if the team isn't any good.
Sure.
So the night-to-night, the day-to-day engagement for a bad team is not the same as football because there's 17 games. It's pretty easy even when they suck. I mean, the NFL is just a monster for, eyeballs. And so that's a little bit different, but it doesn't bother me much because there's always a pocket of people in this town in particular that are living and dying with everything the Sabres do. And I don't think apathy has set in with this fan base based on the last month or so when they almost snuck into the, in the hunt graphic there for about a week. And now when they fire the coach, people are engaged. They're angry, but they're engaged. And that's all you can really ask for.
Kris, when you woke up Tuesday morning, now the Sabres finished their season Monday night in Tampa. You guys did a show after the game. I caught part of it. I wake up Tuesday morning. I'm getting ready to do a show with Aaron Quinn. We're going to tape a Bills mock draft 10, 15 minutes before we get ready to go on the air early in the morning. Word comes down that Granato was fired. I'll start with you. How surprised were you, if at all, when you woke up on Tuesday morning and surely in part of your morning routine or whatever you do, and then all of a sudden you see something come across that Don Granato got fired? Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised by the news just because it seemed like they were set on bringing him back and letting him, giving him a little more runway to see if he could get things right. Whether, because we're trained to believe what humans say.
Sure.
And Kevin Adams was leaving breadcrumbs, and so was Don Granato. Almost he was implying that he felt safe until that last day, I think, when he was talking to the media. But I think that we were led to believe, even if we didn't agree with it, because we were, as a collective on our show, thinking that there was a move that needed to be made as soon as after the holidays.
Yeah.
And they were coming flat. So while I was surprised that they actually made the move, that Kevin actually dug deep and he made a correct business decision for the franchise. And by the way, real quick on the fan engagement thing, I just got to say, I got to get a shot at you. The fan engagement would be a little bit better, even in the best of times, if guys like you weren't peddling this bullshit of getting rid of the Sabres for an NBA team. I just had to get that out of the way now.
I'll tell you right now, I would completely, as my phone's going off, I've said this. If you don't know what he's talking about, I've said a million times, I would trade the Sabres and the Bandits and the Bisons for an NBA team tomorrow. And I don't care if the Sabres won a Stanley Cup. I'd still trade them the next day.
I don't look forward to the Baker Fairburn Hoops show. So I hope that never happens.
That would not be a
I
very
had to
good
get
show.
that out of the way. But no, on Granato, I was surprised, but it was clearly the right decision. Now we need to see what they're going to do with that opening.
What are your thoughts on that, Matt? I mean, we talked about it for a few minutes when we were banging out some wings there before the show at Imperial, but any surprise level? And also, I mean, I heard the show, again, I caught part of your show on Monday night, and you were talking, you kind of set the stage early on that Granato was scheduled to speak on Friday, but you even said on the show Monday night, your show, that, there's a lot of time between Monday and Friday. Well, it took about 12 hours before something came down. So, what was your thought process on Tuesday morning?
I'm going to set the record straight here. I think I have the text from Kris. When you asked how surprised was Kris, where is it? It's in all caps, so it shouldn't be too hard to find. I believe it was holy shit. There it is. All caps. So he was a little
holy
surprised.
Shit, okay.
Yeah. He was pretty surprised. It did. The timing, I think, was a little, not that, I mean, that's the time you do it, right? The morning after the 82nd game. But I think it also suggests, and Kevin Adams alluded to this, he didn't make the decision on the plane on the ride home from Tampa, right? This was something that was brewing. And I asked Kevin Adams directly when I had a Q&A with him before the trade deadline if he anticipated Granato being the coach. He was very quick to say that he did, but I think that it became apparent to him over time what I think was apparent to a lot of people. It was apparent to the fans in December when they were chanting for the guy to be fired. So it was not the most surprising development. I think the surprising development was that they were actually willing to do it. That Terry Pegula is going to pay 2 years of Don Granato's salary for him to not coach, and that Kevin Adams took a long time to fire Ralph Kruger too, if you remember. It took a long losing streak for him to get there. So now he's really got the target on him because this is 2 coaches he's fired, and this third one I think will define him as a general manager. So it had to happen. There's no doubt about that. But it has been an interesting 48 hours or so since hearing from so many players in the locker room and hearing from Kevin Adams. There's a lot of blame getting placed on Don Granato. I hope he made it out of town before the bus got him. I mean, it's been rough.
I want to get to that in a second. And I want to say this too. Like on my Twitter, like when it comes to the Bills, I at least try to be level-headed, objective, a little less emotional with my takes to some extent. Sabres, I'm all in as a fan. Like I get pissed off. I went base this team. And if you go on my Twitter, I had no expectations. I thought there's no way they're playing Granato. Guy's got an extension. I'm like, worst case, he'll get the starter next year. And if they stink after a couple months, then maybe they make a change. So I was getting ready to be angry all summer long and just absolutely blast this organization. So my level of shock was great. How much of this is for both you guys? Lots of factors always going. When something doesn't work out, it's never just one person or one thing. But how much of this, like if you have a pie and you're going to slice it up, how much of this season and the disappointment do you guys think is on Don Granato? And there's other factors too, and we're going to get to the players throwing them under the bus in a second.
I put a decent amount on Don Granato, a good chunk of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exact percentage, but at least half.
Okay.
Probably at least 50%. I think a different coach from the start of the season might get this team into the playoffs. They were that close. I mean, the fact that they were still a pretty competitive team at mid-80s points, never really had a long losing streak, didn't have a lot of long winning streaks. I think you just look at some of the problems they had, right? 97 goals allowed in the first period. Most in the NHL.
Dead last. Yeah.
29th ranked power play that they were never able to figure out. They couldn't get it right. And that's a coaching thing. Starting fast is a coaching thing. They couldn't get to the front of the net. They weren't competitive enough, consistently enough on a night-to-night basis. These are things that I do think a coach has control over. But I will also say this. The players share a good chunk of this as well because it comes from them inside the locker room. And Kevin Adams should share a lot of this too, because maybe they get 25 apiece, or maybe it's 35 Kevin Adams and 15 to the players, because Kevin Adams built the roster.
Yeah.
Jack Quinn got hurt in the summer and there was no real replacement.
He was defensive about that.
He was, but you know what? He made the point in his press conference. John Worrow asked the question and he said, boy, John, if you could have told me that Jack Quinn would have gotten a second major injury, that'd be pretty good. I don't know how you would have done that. I don't have a problem with that, the second injury. The second injury is irrelevant to me. The problem is they played at a 73-point pace in October, November, and December.
Yeah.
Jack Quinn, they were almost out of it by the time Jack Quinn came back. They couldn't convince Patrick Kane to sign in Buffalo, I think in part because of how slow a start they got off to. They didn't make the playoffs because of how slow a start they got off to. So, no, it doesn't matter that Jack Quinn had a second injury because the first one was the one in question, and you knew about it in June. The way the roster was constructed, I think some of the wrong veterans that were brought in, Eric Johnson didn't really hit home. I don't think he was a good leader for a while, but he wasn't a good enough player. You bring back Kyle Okposo and Zemgus Girgensons, and your captain wants out by the deadline. That, to me, was a problem. In the summer, when you're talking to Kyle Okposo, that should be part of the conversation. What if this doesn't go the way we want? Are you in this? Or do you want to go play for a contender? If so, I know he really thought that this team was going to get to the playoffs, but if he was that quick to bail and the leadership was such a problem, as the last 48 hours have seemed to not paint a great picture of Granato or Okposo in that department, that's, again, going to fall on the general manager who didn't make moves. And another thing is, you could have fired Don Granato in December.
Yeah.
A lot of teams do it. Don Granato, by the time he got fired, was the 6th longest tenured coach in the NHL. He had coached the 7th most games in NHL history without making the playoffs.
Crazy.
Guys don't last that long. Kevin Adams was the one who recommended the extension. All of these things fall on the guy who's calling most of the shots, and that's Kevin Adams.
Kris, I want to ask you the same thing, like in terms of blame, how much you put on him. But also, I want to give you kind of irrelevant in a way, but I am going to give you some credit because I'll tell you what, we sat out here on this patio here at Imperial Pizza last summer, whenever it was. We were talking about Pat King, and this is South Buffalo. They all thought it was a good fit here in South Buffalo, Imperial Pizza. Media people, most other fans, nope. To your credit, you did say Pat Kane's still a good hockey player. I remember that, and I remember a lot of pushback from that. And Pat Kane went out. It was a very good hockey player this year. Could have helped. Now, the Sabres, to their credit, it appears that they did try to get Kane, and Kane decided to not come here. But I do remember you talking about, so I do want to give you props because in a world where everyone else seemingly was like anti-Pat Kane, you were advocating for him, saying he would still be a good player. But anyway, in terms of Granato, like how much do you put on this season on him?
Well, I think so. It's funny that you bring up Kane in a way, because I think Kevin Adams took a chance at getting veterans here, whether it was Kane or bringing in Eric Johnson. At the end of the day, though, his efforts came up short. You had a team that was devoid of bona fide leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you have veterans doesn't mean they're leaders. And we're going to talk about this more about, I'm sure, what does leadership look like moving forward. When you don't have the leadership on the ice or in that room with your skaters or your goaltender, whatever, a goalie can be a leader, puts more on the coach. Matthew covered the numbers really well. So to capsulize in a way what Matthew said, you had a team that started slow. They weren't ready to play. I think from a game tactics and in-game adjustments, they fell short too often. Don Granato and his staff, he's not a lone wolf. They shoulder a lot of the blame. Again, they have to make up for that. They have to be the leaders if you don't have it in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a strong voice. I think the guys, I'm not down there every day like Matthew and some of his peers in the media, but what I know about that group, too comfortable.
Yeah.
Too comfortable. And I'm not saying that you have to go full old school hard ass either, but when you're leading a team in any business, you have to be accountable for the execution, having everyone knowing what their jobs are, their roles are every day that they go to work. And I think that the coaching staff fell short. So for that alone, I put a lot of the blame there. And the players, obviously, they have to be better. But the coach can make the players better if he has them ready and set up to succeed. And I think that's where they fell short.
Matthew, you've been in the locker room now for the last 2 days. It's locker cleanout day. Plenty of players have spoken. I followed it. I've seen a lot of the clips and stuff. And I'm like, I was a little bit taken back because it felt to me, and you were there. Players were, on one hand, they were saying, we have to be better. We got to be more accountable. We need to be pushed, blah, 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 blah. It also felt like, to an extent, they were kind of, like you kind of alluded this a little bit, almost throwing Don Granato a little bit under the bus on his way out. It seemed like the players were putting almost as much blame on him for this season as some of the fans and the media, content creators out there doing it. At least, maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of the takeaway, the feeling that I had seeing and reading what I've read over the last couple of days.
I think that's completely fair. And I don't know, as I'm batting around the numbers in my head, maybe 50% is too big of a share for Don Granato. Maybe we should let these adult players shoulder some of this blame. But the tone was weird a little bit. Kevin Adams had what I thought was a pretty good press conference, and he was pretty direct.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I could stand up here and answer questions for an hour and you won't hear me say a bad word about Don Granato. But if you listen to him answer other questions, he didn't use Don Granato's name, but he said our standard wasn't high enough since the start of training camp. Competitiveness starts in practice. So he's already criticizing his training camp, his practice. There was a lot of little things like that. And to your point about the players, it started right away with Jeff Skinner. He was the first player to talk. It basically went in order of games played.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff Skinner, we were giving him a lot of opportunities to, say nice things about Don Granato, because obviously Granato sort of revived his career. And at one point he was asked, and he said something along the lines of, well, he's an NHL coach. And it almost reminded me of Sean McDermott when he took over the Bills job, and he said, there are players on this roster. It's like, sure, there are absolutely players on. It was just like one of those things.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the best thing you can say about this guy. He's like, he got to the pinnacle of his profession. Nothing real specific about him. And then to your point, there was a lot go on down the line. Guys saying, what do you want in the next coach? to me, the answer to that, if I'm a mid-20s to 30-year-old NHL player, is it's not up to me. It's up to the general manager, and it doesn't matter who's the coach if we play like we did this season. End of discussion. But they were happy to say, we need more accountability. We need to be pushed harder. Kevin Adams said they were craving accountability. If that's true, how did he miss it? All this stuff that they said about the fact that they want to be pushed harder, they want to be more accountable, they want somebody with a harder edge, all of these things, if that was true, you need to make that switch in season. You need to recognize that as a general manager, jump in and figure it out. So I only wonder if too many guys in there think if they just press the coach button, everything will be fixed. And I don't think that's how this is going to work. I do think a good coach will go a long way to fixing some of the problems on this team. But I think a lot of guys, and some of the younger guys did say this, need to recognize they're the ones who got Don Granato fired in a big way. And I think the tone just told me not so much about what they need in the next coach. It just told me that they didn't have as much respect for Don Granato as they say they do. They like him. They absolutely, to a guy in that room, I think all like Don Granato as a man and as a coach. But I think there was a respect missing there. And I think you could probably extend that to some of the veterans in the room, where Kyle, I think this generation of player in particular likes following the best players. They like following the successful coaches. Don Granato hasn't accomplished anything in the NHL, so it was hard for him to flip the switch and be that tough, hard-ass coach that Kris is talking about, because that wasn't him for the first few years. And I think a lot of this reflects on Kyle Okposo, too, as the captain. When you're talking about we need to be more accountable to each other, we need to call each other out. Apparently that wasn't happening with the captain that they had. And I think, again, Kyle Okposo, great player, great career, great man, great for this community. But a lot of the guys probably looked at him and thought, you're on the fourth line, man.
Yeah.
My biggest takeaway from the end of season media availability for the players was their commentary on practices. What did Casey Middlestat say when he went to Colorado? One of the first things he mentioned, even if it was kind of like a throw-in or just like a subtle, he mentioned how hard they practice there in a way. Now, we talked about it. Was it adrenaline? Was it altitude? No, I think in retrospect, he was saying, these guys practice here. You're an employee. You're an employee. If your boss lets you slack off, you will.
Sure.
That's where, again, a strong leading hand from the coaching staff matters when you don't have that leader on the ice. That's why I put a lot of it on the coach. The way you practice is the way you play.
Yeah.
And that was revealing. It wasn't the accountability, we need to be pushed. The practice commentary really stuck with me in those past 2 days of media availability.
Rasmus Dahlin was the one who brought it up first, I think. And then there was actually another comment from Matthias Samuelsson today about, because Rasmus Dahlin's was kind of a zoomed out big picture. We need to treat practice like we treat the games. We need to work harder in practice. But Matthias Samuelsson mentioned there needs to be more of a sense of objective at practice. There needs to be a better focus. And that was almost more alarming than what we heard the day before, because it's like, okay, that combined with the Casey Middlestat comments, you start to piece together a picture. Plus, I've watched, I don't know, like 100 of these practices over the last 2 years at least, and you can start to piece it all together. To me, I thought Casey Middlestat, in part, was probably having a harder time at practice because the team's so much better, right? It's like, wow, I've never practiced this fast. It's like, that's because you didn't play with guys this fast. You didn't play with Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar. But there is an element of, I think that's part, you had an inexperienced coach with an inexperienced team. It's just a bad match at some point, and it definitely ran its course. One other thing I'll mention, though, as we divvy up the pie, who shares what blame, it should be noted that Don Granato never had better than a bottom 5 payroll in the NHL. 2 of his full seasons as coach, they were dead last.
Mm-hmm.
You get what you pay for in pro sports, and they didn't spend to the cap, and not even really close,
right?
The last few years. So that's why I say some of it is still a Kevin Adams thing, because this is what Don Granato was brought in to do. If the expectation was clearly to get to the playoffs, otherwise Don Granato would be fired. Now he's been fired. But if that was the expectation, why are you still near the bottom of the league in spending?
Sure.
Because playoff teams spend. This is a league where the cap hasn't gone up. This is a league where teams are looking for every single dollar. They're sending guys to the minors and exploiting long-term injured reserve to squeeze every dollar because the cap hasn't moved. And the Sabres are sitting there with all sorts of cash to spend and not spending it.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the question that obviously I want to ask both of you. And I'm sure a lot of fans, by the way, shout out over 1,200 people right now watching this live here on the video side. Pretty impressive.
It's better than the Baker Fairburn hockey show.
I don't know why we didn't stream it, multi-stream on our channel.
We should have simulcast.
I know,
Taken
we should.
You
advantage,
guys got to be better.
siphoned
man.
off some of his
Got to
audience.
be better. Well, when the Baker Fairburn Moran hockey show debuts, we'll be better. But in all seriousness, I mean, it's the obvious question. What are your thoughts towards who might be the next head coach? Because I got to tell you, before this, originally when like Lindy Ruff got fired from New Jersey, I'm like, Lindy Ruff. Now I was like, maybe Lindy Ruff. I mean, it feels like it could be like real. And Kevin Adams, one other point too, during his press conference on Tuesday when he talked about Granato getting fired, I have no idea. I have no insight into who he might be looking at, but it sure seemed to me like he has a very, very crystal clear focused on somebody. I don't know. Who do you think it might be? One or two people that it could be right now. Who are we looking at maybe as the next Sabres coach?
I have a scenario that may not come to fruition. And we were discussing this earlier, Matthew and I, when you were washing your hands or whatever you're doing. I would say that if Sullivan from Pittsburgh gets canned, I think there's going to be a mad dash from Kevin Adams to get on the phone with him. And I think that would be a slam dunk hire for the Sabres.
Mm-hmm.
He's not available right now, but I can tamper because I don't, I'm not in hockey operations for the Sabres. Outside of that, I don't think it's as clear cut. Like when Lindy, I had a little bit of that sense of nostalgia for Lindy when he got canned by New Jersey. And if you were to surround him with a really young, progressive staff, they don't have to be young, but a progressive staff. When Lindy was here still, before the whole tank thing happened, that blew up and they had to get rid of Lindy, they were making sure that he was getting aligned with young USA hockey coaches. Your Nate Lehmans, your Seth Apperts were in that bunch to keep him in game shape for the modern NHL and modern hockey. I think the same principles would need to apply if we were to bring Lindy back. But the more that I think about it now in the present moment, I don't think that's necessarily the right move. Would it help sell tickets? Would it help get fan engagement back? Yes. Is that the way you should be making business decisions? Absolutely not. I hate to say it, right? Like you have to listen to the voice of the fan to a certain extent. The enemy needs to run the
old
asylum.
Mark Levy quote.
Okay.
If you start listening to the fans, you're going to be sitting with them.
So I think that I have a hard time. I'm still like sussing out some of those available candidates. You can pick them apart, and I'm not going to get into all of them. At least some meat on the bone for Matthew, but I still think like the Sullivan thing would be amazing. And I think Dubas in Pittsburgh he's prone to make a mistake like that. Yeah. By getting his own guy in and cutting that guy loose. And I think that would be a mistake for Pittsburgh, and I think it'd be a boon for the Sabres.
I don't think it would be a bad idea for the Sabres to – Kevin Adams did seem like he was not in a rush, but he was ready.
No, it felt to me like he was locked in on something.
I don't think it would be a bad idea to wait a week or so to see how things shake out, because Mike Sullivan would be at the top of my list if he were available. Sheldon Keefe would be pretty high on my list if he got fired by Toronto or whoever loses these first round series.
Got to wash the stink of Toronto off him.
A little bit.
Right?
But
yeah, you can
he's a good coach. Yeah, and if the Bruins lose, I don't think anything will happen with Montgomery, but that would be an easy one to run to try to hire him. So there's a little bit of a benefit to patience. You don't want to wait too long, because I don't think these teams that go beyond round one are in danger of firing their coaches. Rod Brindamore is unrealistic for a variety of reasons, but would be at the top of the list if not. He'll be expensive. He's probably not leaving Carolina. He definitely would not want to coach Jeff Skinner, so you'd have to factor in the $27 million buyout into the cost of acquisition there. But I have a few Lindy thoughts. I will disagree slightly in that you shouldn't factor in the business boost at all, because I actually think if it did increase fan engagement, it would have a positive on ice result, because if that building is full again more often, that's good for everybody. It starts pushing the energy in the right direction, and the fan to team energy was way off this year from the start. The fans weren't happy from night one when they lost to the Rangers, and if you can get some of that back, that might actually help your on ice product. I also think Lindy Ruff can still coach. He showed it last year in New Jersey, the best point total they've had in franchise history. He won a playoff round. Sabres haven't done that in, almost 20 years.
It's not a hard no for me on Lindy,
I know.
but it's definitely do it for the right reasons.
It's not a slam dunk.
Yeah.
But here's another thing that leads me down the Lindy Ruff road. And I did ask Kevin Adams at the end of the press conference, is he going to be a candidate? Because it felt like we were, like you said, everything he was saying, it just made you think, this is Lindy, right?
Felt that way.
So I just kind of wanted to read his body language and see what he would say in that moment when he heard his name. But Kevin keeping some of the assistants around raises an eyebrow a little bit for me, because Lindy Ruff does have a history with Matt Ellis. Matt Ellis played for him. And the candidate that Kevin Adams is talking about, and this is why this is a fascinating hire to me, pedigree, experience, NHL experience, a harder edge, all these things, accountability, structure, that would be a somewhat threatening presence to Kevin in the organization, in theory. But if it's Lindy Ruff, it's somebody he knows. He coached under Lindy Ruff for a couple of years. Maybe they can have a little bit of more of a back and forth on some of these assistants and whether they stay. And maybe he can help prepare Seth Appert to eventually be the coach, which, they love Seth Appert within the organization. So a lot of those factors lead me down the Lindy Ruff road. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right call. I just don't think it's necessarily a bad call, because the Sabres you can't really look at the Sabres in a vacuum like they're any other NHL franchise, because not everybody wants to come to Buffalo.
Right.
13 years without the playoffs paints a certain picture of ownership here. This will be the 8th coach, in those 13 years. That's an eyebrow raiser for the candidates out there that are potentially interviewing. Lindy Ruff loves this franchise, cares about this franchise. He wouldn't be, 1 foot in. He wouldn't need any time to figure out the dynamic and what's broken between the fans and the team. Or he's been looking at this team. He likes a lot of these players on the roster. He cares about this community, still spends a ton of time here. And with a team like the Sabres, it actually matters, because you're going to be selling free agents. You're trying to get guys to waive no move clauses. And if you have a guy that authentically cares and loves this franchise and this city, I think that can have a positive impact. It could have a positive impact on some of the guys in the room. Like, to have this guy who has been there, done that they've seen on all these clips, losing his mind, trying to fight other coaches. I think it could really energize the group. If there's a better hockey fit, by all means, it's not a slam dunk. It's just a nice one to have in your back pocket.
I just don't want the job handed to him because he's Lindy Ruff and he has relationships still in the building, and there's benefits to having Lindy around. Could you imagine if he came back and they made the playoffs in his first year back? That's a storybook in the city's sports history. If you think about it,
if it goes poorly,
it could be
bad, right? You don't want his legacy tarnished, but maybe, and now I'm just spitballing, but maybe it's good karma, right? Maybe the karma got ruined when they got rid of him the way they did.
I believe in karma. We'll talk on our podcast about the thoughts, because he wasn't supposed to get jettisoned. But no, I think that talk to multiple candidates, though. Make sure you're making the right decision if you do bring him back. That's critical. And again, the staff around Lindy is going to matter, because you're going to hear the arguments about his tenure in Jersey is that success that he had was largely due to Andrew Burnett being the assistant coach. Whether or not that's right or wrong, I don't know. But there is credibility. The assistants matter. We found that out this year.
100%. The assistants were almost as much of the problem as Don Granato this year, and Matt Ellis is still there, and Marty Wilford. What roles they'll be in, they'll probably be different, but the fact that they're still there, to your point, it does mean that Lindy's staff would be important. And the thing I will say, yes, there's comfort, right? That's almost a case to bring in somebody else, to make Kevin, to challenge Kevin, Gerard Gallant, or somebody like that who can look at the roster and say, I can't play with that guy on my third line. I can't play. I don't care how much time you've invested in developing this guy. These are the guys I need to win. And maybe there's guys who like playing for some of these coaches outside of the organization. Maybe Craig Berube gets you, in the door with some free agents. That, and just simply having a fresh perspective on a team that has been broken the last couple of years would probably be welcome. Lindy has a little bit of both, right? He's got the comfort and he's got the outside perspective because he's been coaching against them for a couple of years.
There's a couple good, maybe they're a couple of years away as NHL, viable NHL coaches that are connected to the organization. Now, I know there's a section of fans that don't want to hear about it because I'm also all about looking outside if you can. But if it is Lindy, let's look at some of the benefits also, though. You could maybe get a Jay McKee back in the pipeline who's doing some really good things at the junior level. Mike Pekka, who might not necessarily want to be in bed with the Sabres organization right now. You have a greater chance of getting him back if Kevin Adams believes that he has a pathway and he's on the track to becoming a successful NHL coach. Pekka will be an NHL head coach someday. Mm-hmm. Right now, he's out of the picture, the organization, based on what I know. If you get a guy like Lindy back, you might be able to suck him back into your vortex a little bit if you even want to do that. There's ulterior, there's other benefits.
That's true of a lot
Lindy
of
back.
people, right? In the Sabreverse, he would connect, he would bridge that gap and reconnect that generation of player to this team in a way. It's kind of amazing when you look at the NHL, all the guys from those Sabres teams that are general managers or high-ranking front office people, and none of them work in Buffalo. And it's like, man, these are guys that brought this team to a level, that people still talk about. I remember when I moved here and everybody's like, man, when the Sabres are good, just wait. Here I am, 10 years later.
Well, I mean, it's true, though.
Happen.
Those
were the guys. And now they're, Danny Briere is trying to rebuild the Flyers. Mike Greer's out in San Jose. Ryan Miller, I think, is doing some work with them. Chris Drury has built a great team.
Traded for Patrick Kane.
Right.
I'll let it go.
There's these guys are all out there and they're working for other organizations. And yeah, maybe there's an element of karma that you bring Lindy back. Maybe it's just me, pulling for a good story.
I believe in karma.
Sure. All right, well, let me ask you this. If it's Lindy Ruff or it's Weber, and you're the head coach, both of you guys are the head coach. You look at that locker room right now, as things stand, that roster, who are you going to slap that C on for next season? If it's up to you, if you're the head coach, you got to pick a captain, man.
I can go get a beer because Matthew already knows my answer.
You've been reading our texts. You've tapped our phone lines. This is a big conversation for us. We were talking about this today because the last couple of days, I think, were kind of instructive in that regard. A little bit, right? Rasmus Dahlin is the most likely captain. I'll say that right away. But over the last couple of weeks, I have started to think they need to leave the letter off.
Oh, really?
Right now. Everybody off of it. They need to leave it open, and the new coach needs to have a lot of input on that decision. And I don't think a new coach can come in and look at the locker room and say that. I mean, you look at what happened in Philly. They waited a little while before Tortorella decided to give it to Couturier, which was a somewhat obvious choice all along, but they, Lawton could have gotten it. They kind of made it an organic thing. And especially the last few days, I was waiting, as Kyle Okposo left, who was going to step up, because a big part of being captain is you're the one that's standing there after they lose. And you're talking to the reporters, and Kyle Okposo was always ready, hat on, standing there, ready for us to walk in. Rasmus Dahlin wasn't always that guy. He's so competitive. He gets so angry after they lose that, sometimes he takes time to cool down, but that's part of it. I think he spoke most like a captain probably in the last couple of days. The other guy that Kris and I have been talking about a lot, and more so today, especially after the way that he spoke, is Dylan Cousins. And he didn't play well this year. So that's part of the problem, right? You can't put the C on the guy that just had a very
pretty
disappointing
lousy
season.
season.
I think he was down to 18 goals after, a 30-plus goal season. So it's he didn't play well enough, but he has the makeup. 100%. Of all the guys that spoke in the last couple of days, you don't win games with press scrums, and you don't make franchise-altering decisions with press scrums. But this is a consistent thing in a couple of years covering the Sabres, that he is the one that doesn't just – he says all of the right things, and it comes from a genuine place with him. And his mind is sharp. He's in the right place all the time. He was the one early in the season calling out the team for, not having enough FU in their game, was the way that he put it. And then the GM kind of walked back Dylan's comments for him, a couple weeks later. And he was the one today. First thing out of his mouth was, you can't help but feel that it's our fault. We let him down, and it doesn't matter who the next coach is, all these things. But also was open to the idea of bring in more veterans. I want the competition. I want to see what it's like. We do need grittier players. We do need to play with a harder edge. He's not afraid to say those things. He's also a super competitive guy. I think a big problem he had this year was how much he was pressing and how, he was trying to do way too much once he realized his season wasn't going the right way. So he would be a real – his rising candidacy is why I would leave the letter off for a little while.
So the fact that you would even consider Cousins as a captain tells me that you think that this year maybe was some sort of anomaly. Like, he's going to grow, he's going to get better from this season. Because, again, stepping back as a fan who doesn't know a ton about hockey, but I watch the games, and I'm like, that was not the same Dylan Cousins I saw this year that I saw last year. Maybe I'm wrong for feeling that way.
You're
not even just the stats. It's just kind of what I felt this year watching him at times.
He was off. He didn't play well. And it's like I said, I wouldn't give him the captaincy. I would just leave it for a little while to see, can he go and earn it, right? Does he step up? How does the leadership organically develop over the next, 6 to 12 months? And make a decision based on that. Because once you give it to Rasmus Dahlin, he's a young man. He's got a long contract. You're not taking that thing off. So There's plenty of time. You don't need to rush. And once you give it to somebody that young, it's really hard to take it off. So and once you give it to him, that means Dylan's basically never getting it. So, and he could have an A, and it doesn't really, does it matter? Maybe not. But let it fester, because the whole idea of accountability and, we need to be pushed, we need to earn it, blah, blah, blah. Do something where they actually have to earn it. Don't just give it to, and Dahlin has to an extent earned it, but make a statement about leadership in general that it's going to develop organically. So, no, I wouldn't just give it to Cousins, but should you be worried about Cousins? Maybe a little bit. I don't think I would be panicked about Cousins because is it a big summer for him? Absolutely. I would expect him to bounce back in a big way. That fight he had with Garnett Hathaway seemed like it threw his season off. He wasn't feeling quite right after it. He had to wear the bubble. And then once he got behind the 8 ball, I think his problem was simply he was trying to do too much. He was thinking about scoring, trying to, catch back up to his scoring pace. And he just his game never got back on track because of that, but he's still so young. And to me, I still see a top 6 center, and I see maybe the most important piece of their build, frankly. Like, he has a chance, the potential to be their best player. And if he can reach that unlocks a lot of what could make this team exciting. If
you're a fan and you want to be optimistic about this team right now, I feel like it's at least somewhat legitimate to use excuses as injuries. It somewhat isn't, a fair excuse. You lose Quinn for 2 long stretches. Tage got hurt. It's like, 11 games, and he was playing hurt, obviously, for a lot. You just said Cousins wasn't quite the same. He missed some time. Tuck missed some time. Skinner missed some time. Samuelson missed literally half the season. They're young. Now, I know all teams in the league go through injuries, and the Sabres aren't exclusive to that, but is that a kind of, to some extent, you think, a valid excuse if you're looking for optimism besides just J.J. Bertoga having a good year and UPL playing great after January 1st? You're looking for optimism. Is that something you think that you'd be right to lean on, saying that the injuries were a factor this year, or is it just like, suck it up, all teams get hurt?
I think probably
The
suck it
latter?
up. Yeah, well, so when Jack Quinn went down and Matthias Samuelsson went down
Mhm.
around the same time, I ran the numbers at that point because obviously they were going to miss a lot
We
of
had
games,
this conversation.
right? Yeah.
You put me in my place.
And they, at the time, they were roughly 16th in all the various metrics: man games lost, average cap hit lost, average WAR lost. It was just, they were just an average team as far as what they had lost, both in quality and quantity, of players and games. And they were out of it at that point. I know they
Mhm.
sort of snuck back in it, but they were 10 points out
Yeah.
at that point in January. So then you miss Samuelsson and Quinn for the rest of the year, and they actually played better.
Mhm.
They were fine from that point on. So that's why, to me, I don't now it's context for individual players, right? When you say, should you panic about Dylan Cousins, it's worth mentioning that threw him off a little bit. Same goes for Tage Thompson. Majorly disappointing season, but you have to mention the fact that he broke his wrist and, was fighting through that for a while, was wearing a brace for a little while. This is a guy who makes his living with his shot and his stick handling, and you break a bone that
Sure.
close to, pretty important bone to break. So it all matters, but from a team-wide perspective, that's why I go back to how the roster was built, the depth, not spending even close to the cap. The Jack Quinn thing, to me, can't even remotely be an excuse. He got hurt in June.
Right.
You
Yeah.
had 3 months before training camp to fill his spot
Sure.
and didn't do it. So I don't buy into it too much when it comes to, when Don Granato was starting to use it a little bit. That's when I started to look up the numbers to see, is this legit or is this
Right.
just another NHL team going through injuries? And
Sure.
that's what I think it was.
So on Cousins, just to take it back like 3 or 4 minutes ago, not at all worried about Dylan Cousins. And that puts a target on my back a little bit because I know the season that he had. But you got to see the bigger picture with this kid, and it does relate to the captaincy conversation. I love the take
Mhm.
of leaving it open. I think that's the proper move, to leave that open. But that's it. So I just hope that it's hard to see now for a lot of fans. Cousins is a natural born leader, and that's what gives you the hope that he can grow into that role. Maybe that's why you don't put the C on someone else's chest. But that's also maybe why you go out, find someone. They might not have a captain on the roster right now. I don't know if you said that when I was over getting a
No.
refill.
No, I left some meat on the bone for
I
you.
don't. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's teamwork right there. That's why the show works. But I think that they might not have a captain. So some of these guys, though, so you saw who were coaches' sons in the media availability. Darlene, kept at high level, coach's son. Father's a coach at Frölunda. Matthias Samuelsson got a little more deeper. Shel Samuelsson, NHL veteran, a coach in the league. You can tell those guys. Doesn't necessarily mean they're captain material. Darlene is on the leaderboard right now. If they have to put a C on someone's chest, it might be a mistake. It might be a mistake.
Yeah.
Just because I'm not sure. You don't have a captain by default because you have to give one. You don't have to make someone captain. Captain might not be on the roster yet. This might be 20 whatever it was, 20 whatever, when they went out and got Craig Rivet, brought him in from San Jose, and he became the captain of the team. So there might be some free agent acquisitions out there to get, or trade acquisitions, as crazy as it sounds, who might be a good stopgap until a Dylan Cousins is ready to be the captain of this team. I just wanted to get on the record of saying that. And by the way, you and I, we retweeted Pat's tweet when this went live. We got to undo that retweet because we have to do a podcast, and we're going to talk a lot about this.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
just want to make sure.
We should
Too
shut
late,
up.
guys. Too late.
Save our take.
What kind of beer you got over there?
That is Northeast IPA.
Nice. One last Sabre. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you one last Sabres question, but kind of when you were talking about the coaches, it kind of hit me that maybe this is too premature to ask you. I was going to say this summer, what can you realistically expect for Kevin Adams? But I kind of get the sense now that Well, you need to know who the coach is going to be, because that coach might have a vision for certain types of players that might not be on this roster right now. To your point, if you bring in, say, Berube or somebody, that might attract a free agent to want to come here that maybe they wouldn't be here. So you feel like to ask you what's going to happen in the summer, that's too premature when you don't really know who the coach is yet.
It's a little premature, but it's not entirely, because I don't think Kevin Adams will hire a coach who wants to revamp how they play. I don't think they're at that point. You're not going to see a trap team that just wants to play defense and lock down games 2-1. That's not Kevin Adams' vision, and I don't think that's what he wants. It's part of why I think Lindy Ruff kind of fits, because in New Jersey last year, they played the type of style that the Sabres aspire to. So what can Kevin Adams do this offseason? Well, this is the most important offseason of his life. I think his job sort of rides on it.
Yeah.
He has 4 open roster spots at forward right now. Victor Olofsson, Tyson Jost, Eric Robinson, and Zemgus Girgensons are all unrestricted free agents. You got to do something with those. You absolutely have to go get a third-line center who is a veteran, who can win faceoffs, who can kill penalties, who can provide some leadership, who's been to the playoffs, who likes to hit people, who has some speed.
We have one identified that we're going to talk about on our show.
I got a winger that they could put on the 4th line right now, and he'd be a fan favorite in Buffalo.
You guys save that for you.
We're not giving you that either, Patrick.
That one,
all
we've
right.
been teasing that one on the
It's a
show.
good tease. I like that. I respect the tease.
It's kind of a deep cut, but I every time I watch the guy play, I'm like, this is the guy the Sabres need to go get, and he probably won't cost very much. But they need to change the identity of that bottom 6. They need to add some, not fighters. It's not about fighting, but guys that would be able to if somebody wanted to, and guys that are willing to hit. Dylan Cousins was talking about today, it's tough to play when you know you're going to get hit all night. That's the way the Florida Panthers play. That's the way, a lot of good teams in the league play, and the Sabres just back down to those teams too often this season. So you need to find some of those players, and that's probably the main focus of the offseason. He's got to decide on J.J. Peterka's contract. He's got to figure out what to do with Bo Byram. He's got to figure out some of these things and what to do with UPL, how long to extend him for, how much to spend. But the forward group is where he really needs to turn a lot of his attention, because that's the group that let them down. They scored 47 fewer goals than they did last season. And I think you can also do that one of two ways. You can add bottom 6 forwards, but you can also add a top 6 option that pushes guys down the lineup and helps you balance things out a little bit better.
You were asking about coaching style, or even maybe on ice tactics in a way, or what he might be looking for. I don't for me, again, it's hard to pin down this coach plays this system, because systems have to evolve game to game. And that's where analytics really comes in. You change your game plan night till night based on the analysis of your opponent. The one thing I'll say, just at a very high level from a hockey strategy standpoint, I think for the next coach, is that you can still be a run and gun team like the Sabres have the skill set to be, and yet still play a defensive style like a Ken Hitchcock style. It pushes everything to the outside in the defensive zone. It's simple to do. Doesn't mean you're trapping, but the way that you use your forwards and bring them deeper along the boards, there's things that you can do to force the play on the outside. I think that's going to be important for this team. I'm not saying go and get Ken Hitchcock. He's toast, right? But I almost wonder if there's someone in this tree. What's that?
Todd McClellan.
Maybe.
Those Kings teams could really lock it down when
I think
they
that's
needed
important. Teams got to the inside too easy on the Sabres defensively this year. Now, again, I'm just throwing that out there as something to think about, that Kevin Adams is probably thinking about from a hockey strategy standpoint, because I think that's still a relevant thought. Push that play to the outside. Your shot angles change for your goalies. It's easier for your goaltender. Got to pack it in defensively. You don't have fully collapsed, but there's little things like that this Sabres team the past couple of years hasn't done successfully that they could do moving forward. And defense is the crux of coaching.
Before we get out of here, live at Imperial, man, I got to stay for a couple minutes of Bills talk here. All right, man. I mean, again, you still dip your toes in some Bills coverage, so technically this is work related, I guess. But I want to ask, two things. Number one, I'm not going to ask you for your a bunch of insight on the Stephon Diggs trade, but were you surprised? Again, somebody who you've covered this team, you've been around this team, this regime as is, and again, even this year you've done some work with the Bills. Were you surprised that it came to this? That basically the Bills decided to get a future pick and eat cap money this year. Almost feels like, in their minds, this feels like addition by subtraction, at least for right now anyway. We'll see what happens with the draft. But I guess that'll be my first question. Are you surprised that it came down to this with Stephon Diggs? From what you know.
The last Bill story I wrote was after the playoff game was all about Stephon Diggs, actually. And I referenced in there how much it would cost to trade him and, you know, what it would cost to move on because he didn't show up in that game. And somebody on Twitter pointed out to me that that was the last Stephon Diggs quote as a Bill was in that story when I asked him if he had a minute after the game, and he said, hell no. Nah. And I was like, all right, I'll put that right in there. And, you know, as Trent Sherfield is doing a 15-minute scrum, it's like the captain of the team. Something felt off about it. I wasn't down there every single day throughout the season. And oddly, the only season I covered Stephon Diggs was over Zoom. And he had an amazing year and, the whole thing. Yeah. But it felt almost inevitable. It almost felt like it repeated the Minnesota story in a lot of ways where, you know, things just started going in a certain direction this year. And I think Tim Graham was on it pretty early, writing a lot of stuff and Tim doesn't do that by accident. And so I think, you know, was I a little surprised that they ate that much dead money? Yeah, a little bit. I mean, but they also saved $18.5 million in cash. And so maybe that's why the Sabres are getting a new coach.
That could be. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was about just the head coach, Sean McDermott. I mean, he's been here 7 years now. I kind of feel like you know what he is. What would be, like, say, if you were a fan right now, what is your confidence level in him? Obviously, he's a leader. He's a guy who will win you a lot of games. He gets you to playoffs. But it seems like him, a couple of star players, Ed Oliver, Stephon Diggs, they seem to have like their worst moments in elimination losses in the biggest games. Like, if you're a fan, what would your confidence level be right now with Sean McDermott? And from what you know from covering and just knowing Sean McDermott, where are we at with him right now?
It's an interesting question because it feels like on the one hand, you have Josh Allen, you have Sean McDermott. You're going to be there every year, right? You're going to be knocking on the door. You're going to be in the playoffs. Their biggest roadblock has obviously been the Chiefs. Sean McDermott's defense has not shown up in games against the Chiefs often enough, especially the big games. In the regular season, it seems like they're fine. But in elimination games, Sean McDermott's defense, those are some of his worst games defensively, period. But it is a tricky balance because part of what gets you there to the ultimate end goal is just getting there year after year and knocking on the door. I don't really buy into this idea that, they could do so much worse. Like if you fire Sean McDermott, everything's going to fall apart. Josh Allen's still there. That's the guy that's getting you there year after year. Sean McDermott certainly raised the standard and the culture and the building and all of that really mattered. So I don't know that I, would sit there and say you've got 100% confidence that he's going to be able to out-scheme Andy Reid when it matters. And without that, your confidence level is probably just hovering in the middle of the road, right? You have a top 10 coach in the NHL or in the NFL, I would say. Somewhere in there. You could debate where he falls in there, but what it really comes down to is he going to be the one that gets you past the teams that matter. And I don't know. He might. I mean, Andy Reid figured it out, but it took him a hell of a long time. And it took him having the right quarterback. I think that's the piece that will be interesting as they continue to evolve and they have to get by with less on offense because they're spending so much money on Josh Allen. It puts an onus on Brandon Beane to draft well, but it makes you wonder about having a defensive head coach like that who maybe isn't pushing the envelope on offense the way you've seen some of the turnover they've had at coordinator since Dable left. That's where not having the offensive mind at head coach who's figuring out new ways to make use of this unicorn of a quarterback they have that, maybe puts a damper on some of the confidence. But I do understand the people that sit there and say, man, it could be a lot worse because I think people do know. I mean, and I think the guy who's making the ultimate decision, Terry Pegula, all he has to do is look downtown and see how hard it can be to find the right people to lead your organization. So it's a tricky one.
Kris, I'll ask you this last question, or Bill's related question. the window's not closed. As long as Josh Allen is playing and he's playing at the level that he's playing at, the window's always going to be open. But you kind of feel like these last 3 years, you're not going to get a better path to get into a Super Bowl. I mean, a lot of things fell their way in terms of they could have had a neutral field AFC Championship game a couple of years ago. They've had home field games that they've lost. The Chiefs offensively weren't really that good this year. So they've had a lot of opportunities in 13 seconds, of course, and it just hasn't fallen their way.
So as a noted football guy, okay, if it's a week-to-week league, how is it not a year-to-year league?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the Bills and I look at Dalton Kincaid, who probably could be your number one receiver. So if you had some speed on the outside and you got a young James Cook, you have a pretty good offense. Just kind of build around that. I always say football is one in the trenches. Keep those lines sturdy.
Yeah.
A little concerned about the secondary, though, right? Like it's safeties. Maybe kind of tune those up a little bit.
Good
I don't think the
question.
window's closed, though. Josh Allen's still fairly young. So I think you got another couple good solid years with him. You just build around and get him some weapons and just like let it fly. And I don't think the window is closed. I know they wasted some good years. I'm not saying that you're saying the window is closed by any means.
Right.
I think some think that, though.
Sure.
You can see the writing on the wall. And it seems like they're set up maybe for not next season, but the year after that to really go and really build around them and take get ready for the final years of that window. But I think that hope should still spring eternal for the Bills and the fans with this team. I think you got some good young weapons. And as long as you have Josh.
Sure. And look, drafts aren't made in just the first round. You know what I mean? Day 2, day 3 picks matter a lot. But do you get the sense that this team needs to take a wide receiver next Thursday night in their first round? Anything else is good. Obviously, the fans
There's
are
a
going to hate
Baker,
it.
by the way, wide receiver.
Javon Baker,
Looks
my
pretty
guy.
good.
UCF, same school as Gabe Davis, by the way. They early day 3, late day 2 pick for him. But you kind of feel like this team needs to get a receiver very early, or you kind of not on that boat.
I think they need to draft more than one, and it doesn't necessarily need to. It doesn't have to be in the first round.
Right.
I think you can get yourself in trouble when you think you need to trade up, way up, to get a certain guy. I think what we're seeing now is the result. All this pressure and all this conversation about wide receiver is really just the result of not paying enough attention to the position over the last handful of years in the draft.
Sure.
This is reason why you should be taking receivers in the middle rounds, hoping to hit on one, and they haven't done that. And I think that's on Brandon Beane, and he has to now resist the temptation to feel like he has to do one particular thing, because especially when you trade up, I feel like that's just when you trade way up because you think you're one piece away or you're one guy away, that's when you can get in trouble, unless it's a quarterback. So, but I would be taking multiple throws. I'd be throwing multiple darts. If it's not the first round, it better be on day 2.
Has the NFL seen the best Curtis Samuel?
Maybe not. I mean, his best season was
I'm just asking the question.
His best season was 2020.
Have we seen him healthy with a quarterback like Josh Allen?
No, his best season was with Joe Brady in 2020 in Carolina. So, could be. I'll end this with a bold prediction with the draft. The Bills are going to move up from 28, but it ain't going to be for a receiver. It's going to be an edge. Latu, Jared Verse, one of those guys, one of those edge guys. There's only like 3, maybe 4 edge guys that are first round caliber guys, and then there's a big drop off. I can see the Bills moving up, getting an edge, going to drive fans crazy, and then coming back with some receiver like in round 2 at pick 60.
Do you agree with that?
Or something like that.
I'm going to co-host now. Do you agree with that take?
I am. I'm pretty checked out on the NFL draft. I didn't listen to the pre-draft press conference. I haven't done my scouting report, my mock drafts, but I love the take.
Sports enough?
I love the take because it's out there. It's different. I have not heard that take. Although I just admitted I haven't been consuming.
I think if they're trading up, they have to take an offensive.
Brandon Beane probably
Allen,
will
right?
trade up. Brandon Beane gets very antsy, and he will trade up. But I think it's a good point to mention, a good expectation to set with the people that you can get good receivers after the first round.
Sure.
And that this is supposedly one of the best receiver classes we've seen in 12 months. Because every year,
every year is a great receiver class.
Where was Tyreek Hill drafted? What round?
Late 5th round, but he had off-field stuff that pushed him down. But Puka Nacua this year.
Yeah.
That's right.
You can find those guys. That's not a reason to wait. It's a reason to throw multiple darts at the board and hope you hit, because you have one of the best quarterbacks on the planet. He will make to your point, he's probably going to make Curtis Samuel look better than he's ever looked, and he's going to make one of these receivers look better than he would look somewhere else. Give him the chance to do it. Give him a chance to be the leader of your offense instead of Stephon Diggs being that alpha that needs to command all this attention. Let him enter into that Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady era where he's making the guys around him better, and he can be that guy. He doesn't necessarily need the bona fide number one receiver because he's that good.
That's what I wanted to ask, though. So I know you want to button this up, but is Kincaid a number one receiver? Number one?
91 targets as a rookie, and you
how many targets?
Like 91.
91.
70-something catches.
That's. What did Diggs have at his peak? Like 115, somewhere around there? I don't know.
Yeah, 160, like 150 or 160 targets.
Okay, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to know. No one they get is going to command that.
Like Herman Moore, but those were like the number of catches that he had. They weren't even targets.
I tend to agree more with what Matt said. They're going to get a receiver. I hope they get two, but I don't think there's going to be one undisputed, like quote unquote, big time bona fide number one receiver on this team going forward. Getting a weapon or two to add. Yeah, Kincaid, Cook, Dawson Knox, 12 personnel. You know what I mean? Got a lot of things going on here. So
I'm curious what the offense looks like without Diggs, because there were a few people I talked to that would mention, when I was filling in for that month and doing some stories, were pointing out routes that he was running that were almost conflicting with the offense in some ways. I think there was a game early in the season where he almost stole a touchdown from I think it was Dawson Knox, where the pass looked like it was clearly, it might have been Kincaid actually, one of the tight ends that, and the route Diggs ran, you were like, that's not your ball, but he got it and it was a touchdown.
Who runs those routes now? Shakir?
Well, probably not, because he's an outside guy.
Larry McConkey after the Bills draft.
Right, yeah. Or one of these.
With him, actually. Yeah, okay.
But, when you can get everybody on the same page a little bit, and Josh Allen doesn't have to focus so much on one player, maybe there's some benefit there. Now that he's beyond that stage, when he was young and he needed that guy, he needed a guy that he could count on. So it'll be interesting. But I think Josh Allen, like with the Sean McDermott conversation, when everything comes back to him, got the hardest piece to find. You got one of the two or three best quarterbacks on the planet, and that's going to win you a lot of football games.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens draft night. Our friend Buffalo Wins on Twitter will have a coronary if they draft.
I didn't even be talking again. I'm not going to do it. I love you, Joe.
When's he going to be in town? We got to.
I think he's mentioned something about June. Maybe I'll have him get together with you guys. Me, Baker, and Joe we'll do a live show together. All right, we'll end it there. That's a perfect way to end. I want a couple quick thank yous too. First of all, I want to thank Imperial Pizza again. As always, the wings were great. The atmosphere is great. Great place to be. I want to thank these guys, of course. I want to thank, we got almost like 1,900 people that were watching this live. Appreciate y'all very much. A ton of comments. People had a lot of comments. I didn't put any of them up on the screens. I don't do that shit. You guys do that. So, again, check out Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. They will engage with you. They will put up your comments. They will
Ted
answer
is not
your
about the
questions.
community.
Yeah,
I'm not about the
subscribe from Pat's show and subscribe to the Baker Fairburn.
Find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on the Sabres Prospects YouTube channel. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star reviews.
Thanks, guys. And thank you all for listening. Have a good weekend. I'll be back. New shows on Monday. Talk to you then.